The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I still remember staring at my phone in the dark, watching my son-in-law's name light up the screen, thinking nothing good ever comes from a call that late. I let it ring. I don't know why. Some instinct I can't explain. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay there in the dark listening to my own breathing until the buzzing stopped. Then I picked it up, saw the missed call, and called my daughter instead. She didn't answer either. That was the beginning of everything. My name is Walter. No, let me start over. I'm not going to get into the habit of treating this like a police report. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I worked 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, and until 14 months ago, I believed that the worst thing that could happen to a man in retirement was bad knees and a leaky roof. My daughter Faye is 34. She married her husband Garrett 6 years ago. The wedding was in Asheville, North Carolina, outdoors, late September, the kind of afternoon that makes you think the world is fundamentally decent. I walked her down the aisle. I cried. I'm not ashamed of that. Garrett worked in commercial real estate. Good-looking guy, firm handshake, always had something slightly too clever to say. My wife, June, my ex-wife now I should say, she passed 4 years ago from ovarian cancer. June never trusted him. She told me that the week after the wedding, there's something about him, she said, that reminds me of a door that's been painted over one too many times. I told her she was being unfair. She usually wasn't. After June died, Faye and I got closer. She'd come over for Sunday dinner. We'd watch old movies on TCM. She'd sit in her mother's chair and fold her legs under her, and we'd talk until 10, 11 at night the way we hadn't since she was in high school. I thought we were close. I thought I knew her. I'm getting ahead of myself. The night the call came, I was visiting my brother-in-law in Knoxville. He'd had a hip replacement and needed help for a week, so I'd driven down from Roanoke on a Saturday. My intention was to stay through the following Sunday, let him get steady on his feet, stock his freezer, fix the gutter on the back of his house that had been pulling away since the previous winter. I was sleeping in his guest room on a pull-out sofa that had a bar in the exact wrong place when my son-in-law's name lit up my phone at 11:47 p.m. I let it ring. 40 minutes later, I was still awake, staring at the water stain on the ceiling when I tried Faye again. Voicemail. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Couples fight, phones die, people fall asleep early. I did not sleep the rest of that night. By 6 in the morning, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. By 7:15, I was loading my bag into my truck. My brother-in-law stood on the porch in his robe with a cup of coffee and didn't say anything except drive safe, which was his way of saying he understood. The drive from Knoxville to Faye's house in Cary, North Carolina is about 4 hours if you push it. I pushed it. Faye and Garrett lived in a neighborhood full of houses that all looked slightly like each other. Beige siding, two-car garages, Bradford pear trees lining the streets. The kind of neighborhood where people put American flags out on July 4th and leave their recycling bins at the curb a day too long. Perfectly ordinary. I pulled up at noon. Garrett's car was in the driveway. Faye's was not. I parked on the street and walked to the front door. I had a key. Faye had given it to me after June died in case of emergencies. I was reaching for it when a man's voice behind me said, "Sir, hold on." I turned around. He was maybe 45, medium height, standing on the lawn next door with a phone in his hand and an expression on his face that I can only describe as deliberate. Like he'd been waiting. Like he'd been watching for me. "Are you Faye's father?" he said. I told him I was. He said, "I think you should hear something before you go in there." His name was Kevin. He and his wife had lived next door to Faye and Garrett for 3 years. He knew Faye well enough to wave to her in the driveway, knew her schedule, knew the sound of her car. He told me that at 10 the previous night he had been letting his dog out into the backyard when he heard Faye and Garrett through the fence, yelling at first, and then Faye's voice going suddenly quiet, and then nothing. He'd stood there for a few minutes, told himself it was none of his business. Then he'd heard a thump and a sound he described, carefully, as someone falling. He'd called 911. By the time police arrived, Garrett had told them Faye had slipped in the kitchen. She was conscious, sitting at the table with a dish towel held to her forehead. She'd backed him up. The officers wrote it down as an accidental fall and left. Kevin said he'd been up all night deciding whether to call someone. He didn't have my number. He'd found me through the neighborhood Facebook group. I'd been tagged in a post Faye shared 2 years ago on Father's Day. He showed me the message he'd typed and never sent, sitting there in his drafts. I stood on the sidewalk and read it, and then I handed his phone back to him without a word. I called Faye. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Where are you right now?" A pause. Then her voice, too carefully neutral, "I'm at the pharmacy." "Why? Are you all right?" "Of course I am." "Dad, why are you all right?" "Of course I am." "Dad, why are you? Did something happen?" I said, "I'm standing outside your house." Silence. "Come pick me up," I said. "Right now. Don't come home first." She met me at a Panera Bread 6 blocks away. She was wearing sunglasses and a long-sleeve shirt in 70-degree weather, which told me everything before she sat down. The bruise on her forehead was the size of a plum. She kept the glasses on until I reached across the table and took them off myself, gently, and set them on the table between us. She didn't fight me. She just looked at me with her mother's eyes. June's eyes, grey-green and steady even when they were wet, and I had to look away for a moment to keep myself together. "How long?" I said. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that a table of college students near the window burst out laughing at something on somebody's phone, and the sound of it was obscene. "About 2 years," she said. "On and off. On and off. He gets stressed about money. It's not what you're thinking. Faye, it hasn't been, Faye." I said her name the way I used to when she was 9 years old and trying to talk her way out of something she knew was wrong. She stopped. She looked at her coffee cup. I did not tell her what Kevin had told me. Not yet. I needed to understand what she would tell me herself. She told me about the first time, which was 18 months after the wedding, after Garrett lost a major commission and they'd had a fight about credit card debt. She told me she'd explained it away as a one-time thing. Stress. He apologized for 2 weeks straight. Bought her flowers so many times she started to hate the smell of lilies. She told me it had happened 4 more times that she'd counted, her word. Counted like she'd been keeping a ledger, and maybe 2 or 3 other times that were borderline. Her word again. I sat there and listened to my daughter use words like borderline and on and off about her husband putting his hands on her, and I kept my face very still and my hands flat on the table. "I need you to come stay with me," I said when she was done. "Dad, not a conversation. I drove 4 hours this morning because I had a feeling something was wrong. Kevin from next door called 911 last night because he heard you fall. You're sitting across from me with a bruise on your head and a long-sleeve shirt in April." She took a breath. "I'm not going to fight you on this," she said quietly. We left her car in the Panera parking lot. She didn't bring anything from the house. We drove straight to a Hampton Inn off I-40, and I got her a room and sat with her until she fell asleep, watching HGTV at 8 o'clock that evening. And then I went to my own room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while. I thought about June. I thought about how she'd said something about him reminds me of a door that's been painted over one too many times. I thought about how I had told her she was being unfair. The next morning I called an attorney I knew from my county work. He specialized in civil matters but knew enough to point me toward a family law attorney in the Raleigh area. I called her office when they opened at 9. She had a cancellation at 2. While Faye slept, I sat in the hotel lobby and made a list of everything Kevin had told me and everything Faye had told me, dates where I could get them, specifics. I'd spent 3 decades writing engineering reports, which means I know how to document things so they can't be argued with. The attorney's name was Diane. No, not Diane. That's on the list. Her name was Pamela. She listened to everything I had to say, and then she asked me several questions, and then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "You understand this will move quickly if your daughter is willing to cooperate." Faye cooperated. She was photographed. She gave a statement. She called her own doctor, who had records of a stress-related visit 16 months ago, that Faye now clarified for the first time. Garrett was arrested 2 days later at his office. He was charged with domestic assault causing physical injury. His attorney got him released on bond the same afternoon. I was standing in the parking lot of a Harris Teeter when my phone buzzed and I saw it was Garrett calling. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was mostly him keeping his voice very calm and measured while telling me I had made a terrible mistake and that Faye would be furious with me once she came to her senses. He used the phrase came to her senses twice. I saved the voicemail. I forwarded it to Pamela. What happened over the next several months I'll try to tell straight. Garrett hired an attorney who specialized in making victims sound unreliable. There were depositions. There were delays. There were moments when I could see the weariness settling into Faye's shoulders, and I knew she was calculating how much easier it would be to drop the whole thing. I never pushed her. That was the hardest part. I had opinions about what she should do, but I kept them largely to myself because I had learned, slowly and at some cost, that a woman who has spent 2 years being told what to do by a man does not need her father doing the same thing. What I did instead was show up. I drove down from Roanoke every other weekend. I took her to dinner. I sat in waiting rooms during appointments. I replaced the deadbolt on her apartment door after she found a place in Durham. I learned how to install a Ring doorbell from a YouTube video at 11 o'clock at night because the one she ordered wouldn't pair with her Wi-Fi. Kevin testified. He was calm, precise, entirely credible. The defense attorney tried to suggest he had some personal interest in the matter, implying something inappropriate about a neighbor who'd paid close attention to a married woman, and Kevin looked at the man across the courtroom and said flatly, "I heard a woman fall and I called for help." That's what people are supposed to do. The jury took 4 hours. Guilty. Garrett was sentenced to 18 months, suspended after 6 with probation and mandatory counseling, a permanent protective order, supervised contact restrictions. His real estate license was suspended pending review. I know some people reading this will think that's not enough. Some days I think that too. But Faye was there when the verdict came in, sitting next to me in that hard wooden courtroom seat, and when the judge finished speaking, she let out a breath that I realized she had been holding for 2 years. Maybe longer. That was enough. It had to be. 3 weeks after sentencing, a card arrived at my address in Roanoke. The handwriting on the envelope was Faye's looping, left-leaning, the same as when she was 12. Inside was a single sheet of hotel stationery, the kind with a logo at the top from a place I didn't recognize. She'd apparently written it during a work trip to Charlotte, sitting alone in a hotel room. "Dad," it said, "I know I made this harder than it needed to be. I know you drove down in the middle of the night because you had a feeling, and I know what that kind of love costs a person. I want you to know I understand that now. I'm sorry it took me so long to let you in. I think I was ashamed. I think I kept believing that if I handled it myself, it meant I hadn't made a mistake. But that's not how it works, is it? That's not how any of this works. Thank you for not making me feel stupid for loving him. Thank you for being angrier than I was allowed to be. I needed that. I didn't know I needed it, but I did. I'm okay. I really am. I'll call Sunday. I read it twice, standing at my mailbox in the cold February in Virginia, my breath coming out in small clouds. Then I folded it and put it in my shirt pocket and went inside. She called Sunday, like she said she would. We talked for an hour and a half. She told me about a promotion at work. She told me she'd started running again, which she hadn't done since college. She told me she'd signed up for a pottery class, which I told her sounded terrible and which made her laugh the way she used to laugh when she was small, all the way from her stomach. I want to say something about Kevin because I think he deserves it. I sent him a letter 2 weeks after the trial. I thanked him for doing something most people convince themselves isn't their business. I told him that the 3 minutes he spent in his backyard deciding whether to call 911 may have saved my daughter's life, and I meant that without exaggeration. He wrote back. Short note, 3 sentences. Said he was glad Faye was doing better. Said he hoped she landed somewhere good. Said I'd want someone to do the same for my family. That's the thing about decent people. They don't think of it as heroism. They just think of it as basic math. People ask me sometimes, friends from the county, guys I golf with, my brother-in-law who still owes me for that gutter. They ask me what I would have done if I'd walked through that door instead of listening to Kevin. If I'd gone straight up the walk and used my key and walked into whatever was waiting inside, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I was angry enough by the time I understood the whole picture that I can't say for certain I would have handled it well. I'd like to think I would have been measured and calm and done everything in the right order. But I knew even then that the most important thing I could do was not be the person who made this about my anger. Bay needed a father who would drive 4 hours on instinct and still be calm enough to take the sunglasses off her face gently. She didn't need someone who kicked in a door. The door would have been the wrong move. Listening was the right one. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the most powerful thing a man can do is stop and wait and let someone else tell him the truth he almost walked straight past.